Anthropic is telling you to burn as many tokens as possible. Here is what Anthropic isn't telling you. We gotta read between the lines. Explain. This is gonna be a reflection on 3 movements within the AI space. One is IPOs, which everybody has written a good article about. There used to be an era where Ubers were $5, and obviously they're not anymore. And a lot of it had to do with their IPO, public market scrutiny that comes with it. And we're seeing something similar where AI providers or LM providers are moving towards token-based billing because the subscriptions are heavily subsidized. And I want to explain why Boris, the creator of Claude Code, going out there and saying like, our job is to write as many loops as possible so that thousands of agents can run in the background is pretty much just like a sales ploy. I'm not saying it doesn't work, but I think it's a very easy thing to say for someone that can use as much tokens as they want and don't really have to think about token allocation economics. And obviously it helps Anthropic as well. So let me get into the detail. So basically we have discussed the IPO. We have Boris going on, I don't know, some podcast, whatever, talking about loops. And then Fable 5, which launched yesterday, they included in the plan, has multiple reasons, right? They want people to use it. Obviously, you want to get usage data out of it, but it will switch to compute credits in 2 weeks. And then they say they will switch it back as fast as possible, whatever that means. So we'll have to see. But yeah, so what is going on, right? So you have a guy and it goes on and says like, I'm writing loops. I have like thousands of agents running in the background at night, doing stuff. And yeah, submitting PRs, fixing bugs, anything really that either from my experience in production just doesn't really work or is basically just busy work to some extent, right? So maybe there's like 3 valid use cases where I want to have something autonomously run in the background, but it's just so much hype around it. And I don't know, I just think people that focus on what they're actually doing and not having it run in the background, they're actually shipping a lot more. Just because there's always drift. Like if you really don't care if your requirements are this loose that you just can live with whatever, you can probably do it. But if you want to make sure that things work properly, I would recommend, at least for hard tasks, to always run yourself, look at the output and move with that. So it's for simple things, right? I think it's useful, but ultimately I think it's always being sold as this magic bullet, which is the problem that I have with it, right? Anyway, decide for yourself. So the IPO, a bunch of things going on, SpaceX, OpenAI, and Anthropic. And of course, the, June 22nd, Fable 5. Fable 5 is very good. It's more token intensive, but it's very good at long running tasks, which is another sign for things moving to the background, right? Because then you can just have it run somewhere else for a very long time. But obviously the more it runs, the more you have to make sure that you have process in place to reduce drift. And again, from my experience, it's just where it needs to be. Oh yeah. And here it says, okay, at this point, sufficient capacity allows us to do so. We aim to restore, which obviously can take a while. And so if you want to get the best output, you're probably going to bite the bullet. You're probably going to just pay for extra credits. So how do they connect? The IPO needs growth. We need loops, so we maximize burn. We have metered credits. All of a sudden, we monetize the burn, and obviously, who's paying for it is you. And it's basically the loop, because it is unmonitored. It just can do whatever the fuck it wants, right? I mean, yeah, now we can start building rails about token usage, how many messages are being sent, like early exits or whatever, but then you're starting to basically monitor the system that is supposed to be running autonomously, which, might not be a bad idea, but it's also just kind of like, what's the point? You know what I mean? Especially if you don't get a lot of return off these tasks. But again, all depends on your use case as well. So essentially, what you're being sold is like, okay, you're a bottleneck, just remove yourself, parallelize, Jesus Christ, what a word, yourself away. And yeah, so it's just funny, like whenever all this autonomous stuff is being talked about, as of right now, it costs more probably than hiring someone. And obviously there is merit in scaling that. It's easier to scale. It's also less communications overhead, which is like when a team scales, that's most of the cost, I would say. It's just that there's not a person to keep in the loop, person whose opinion you need. They're not fully opinionless either. So there's alignment issues. So all these things obviously you don't have, but right now and how things are moving, it's actually not, the promised it's going to be electricity and it's going to be so cheap utility. Nobody's going to care, right? Like that might happen at some point, but I don't think we're there yet, and I don't think we will be there for a while. And what's been happening is that it's actually become more expensive. Like every model, Fable 5 or whatever, uses twice the amount of Opus credits or usage quota or whatever. It's also twice expensive via the API, right? So it's actually getting more expensive. And because we always want to be on the most cutting edge model, it's not like, okay, now I can, maybe Sonnet there will be a new Sonnet that's just as good as Sonnet, then it will be cheaper. But then we're like, but I can't use that because I need to be cutting edge. So you're always going to run with what's most expensive, or you're likely to. And one thing that actually already happened is that enterprise accounts, they are on token-based billing already, which a lot of them had to cancel their subscriptions or just have less seats because we're not trained right now to be diligent in our usage, right? We're not trained to be not necessarily just diligent, but also just like discerning. It's just like, okay, let's take the biggest model and just throw it at it. And it actually causes a lot of issues as well when, someone that is trying to sell AI products, but then when I build a product, I also pay for the API, right? So essentially you tell people like, hey, for a big thing where we're looking at 50,000 files just to find certain things, obviously this shit's gonna be expensive. And they're like, wait, why? The subscription is like $20. So there's like zero understanding, and it's just very, very, very frustrating to be on the other end of that and then try to explain to people, well, the API isn't free and the API isn't $20. The API is however much we need. And if I look at my token usage, I think I'll burn like 5K in credits or something for my $200 max subscriptions. The gap is just massive, basically. And another thing with all this loop stuff is essentially also that you have a tax on the developer or on you yourself, which is like multitasking, switching between stuff. Because what if your agent creates 50,000 PRs in the background? Like, who's gonna look at them? Are you just gonna merge them in? Maybe if you're have one user and that's your mom, like maybe you will, but if you're running a production system, it's like not very feasible. But yeah, the downside risk is just too high, right? Most likely we'll be fine, but I've seen Claude Code do stupid things for no reason, so I don't really trust any of it without at least reviewing. Yeah, so I think for me, 3 things in parallel is slower than just one thing you ship front to end. And especially once you review, so if you don't have a good system for drift, it basically means like, okay, your review is kind of the endpoint and all the drift has already happened, right? And so oftentimes I'll find myself just redoing something I have done in the background just because it does something dumb, and the error compounds the longer it runs, and then I'm starting all over, which is twice the token use, right? So then I'm like, okay, so clearly I need to do this myself here on my own machine in order to make sure it works. And then often I will, write a plan front and do all this garbage to make sure that it clearly isn't capable of inferring what I want from what I have described. So we need to make a plan and we need to run through this whole process. So then, I think what you need, unless you're trying to ship a shitload of slop, then it works. But I think if you really want to do something meaningful, as at least right now, and these are things that might pay off in the future when things get better, and then you will be ahead of everyone else. But I can't really even afford to do it, like even if I wanted to. So yeah, what I think skill that matters, and it has mattered the whole time, is token allocation. So it's just capital allocation. And everyone's a fucking CEO now, but then you need to allocate tokens. What deserves tokens, what doesn't, what deserves best model, what doesn't, what deserves your attention at all. Because of all the context switching, your attention is just like very, very scarce, right? So I think, most loop output just doesn't move the needle just for the provider, which is surprisingly, who wants to IPO? Anyway. So on 22nd of June, the meter for like Fable 5 or whatever will start. What, how much to use and what actually shipped, like what is actually useful and what is not. And until then, I guess you can experiment around a bit with loops and whatever you want. But I think I'll probably build a lot of that back, or you will have to make it so dumb by using something cheap like Haiku or whatever, then it might not do it at all. That shit's brain dead. Anyway, I have actually an interesting thing here, maybe. I have a system. I keep tweaking. It changes like every 2 to 4 weeks, so let's say, just because things are moving so fast, so you're probably familiar. But I just try to do one ticket at a time. You know, I create a linear ticket, I do a triage myself, I estimate the effort, maybe I'll get some help from Claude to just, you know, look at the blast radius, like how much change there is, how many files are being touched. I think that helps you with the effort estimate, but usually it's gut feeling, but that's because I have 12 years of experience, right? So I kind of understand what's hard and what's not hard. And then basically based on that effort, and I went back to writing tickets by hand just because the amount of fighting to not get a slot ticket that has like 15 features I didn't ask for. I mean, it's possible, right? But it's just like, it's just not worth it. So usually it takes me longer to describe what I want to do than to just write like 3 bullet points of like this little feature and then flesh that out later into a plan. But, you know, basically based on the effort estimate, I say, okay, what's under 3? Just can go to Claude's GitHub app or whatever agent, you know, background agent you use. But everything over that I need to do myself, and I try to do just one at a time. But I'm gonna show you how exactly it works and all the heuristics, or maybe the principles behind why I do this way. And if you don't want to miss that, if it's interesting, then subscribe down below, and I'll see you when it's ready. Alrighty.